how this works. So to my right, I want to introduce, how you doing, brother?
Good, thank you.
What's your name?
I'm Travis Reed.
Travis Reed, all right. All right, and to his right?
Milton Tamber.
Milton Tamber, okay, how you doing, Milton?
All right.
And to his right, we got King
Servant.
of the Hebrew, King of the Hebrew Israelites.
Abiz, your brother, Gidon Ben Yasharov. Thank you for having me on the set,
All
my
right, well,
brother.
you know, you King, because you're going to be asking questions too here, Giddy.
Uh-oh, look out now.
You know, we gonna
I want to hear from the socialists. Let's be social with the socialists.
all right.
And me and Milk kind of go back because we're chaplains of the common good at the People's Agenda,
Okay.
presided over by the Dean of the Civil Rights Movement, Dr. Joseph Eccles Lowry.
Lowry, okay.
So,
Okay.
Well, that's very interesting that you should use the term social as a starting point, because the word social
yes,
has to do with people living together around their common welfare.
exactly.
And guess what's happened in this country? How is socialism viewed? It's been demonized.
Exactly.
And so it's incredible to think about demonization when we're talking about the common good, people living together and working based on their common interests.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add one point that you had mentioned, and this is something that people aren't aware of, the history of socialism in this country.
Okay.
Actually, there's a long, rich history. There's a
Mm-hmm.
great book by John Nichols called The S Word.
Mm-hmm.
It's a history of an American tradition. And between 1880 and 1920, there were many socialists who were elected to office. There were two congressmen who were socialists, but they ran on a Socialist Party ticket. So there was a strong Socialist Party.
Okay.
Eugene Debs, who we feel very strongly akin to, ran as President of the United States 5 times on the Socialist Party ticket.
Okay.
That's a history that people don't really know about. And it's Norman Thomas. Some of you may have even heard of Norman Thomas. He ran as President of the United States in the 30s. And he's, under his ticket, unemployment compensation issues, Social Security. And who picked up on that? FDR.
Exactly.
So the tradition of socialists speaking about the issues of the common good really has made a difference. So she is, while she's a democratic socialist, if you go back far enough, there's been a long history of socialists who have been involved in the electoral process and trying to make things better that way.
So, I mean, I know a lot of people, and I know you said you deal with the unions. You know, a lot of people are talking about wage equality. You know, you got capitalism, which basically the 1% takes in all the excessive profit and leave the rest of the 99% to strive and try to struggle with $7 an hour. And I can imagine living $7 an hour in Manhattan City of all places, but you know, how would this work under socialism? I mean, how would the structure, you know, your Walmarts, your Monsantos, I'm just throwing these names out there because they're the largest. It's been on record this year that Walmart is the largest employer of the United States.
Right.
And so in that structure, how would that work? I mean, let's just say I'm the CEO of Walmart and you guys are my workers. How would
Well,
Under a socialist agenda.
under socialist.
Well, the first thing you got to do, I'm still thinking about the fight right now in this country about Walmart workers.
Right.
We were just talking, Travis and I, about Walmart workers who have gone out on strike. We had the Atlanta Jobs with Justice Coalition. We were demonstrating in support of Walmart workers on Black Friday.
That's right.
Because these Walmart workers, they don't know what their schedule is going to be from one time to the next. The average wage is about $8 an hour. They don't get benefits. And you're talking about not only the largest corporation in the world, but one of the richest.
Exactly.
You got the heirs to the fortune own as much wealth as 40% of the American people. And yet they can't give these people a living wage. And if there's interest in trying to form a union, you know what they do?
Fire 'em.
They fire him.
Exactly.
And so, as Travis and I were talking, he wound up finding out about a Walmart worker who was fired. You might want to speak about that.
Oh, absolutely.
Correct.
Tell them about what happened and how you got involved in trying to give support to that worker.
Basically, he was let go because he had decided to strike. He decided to stand up for his own sense of dignity and ask for a living wage.
Wow.
And this was because, partially because he had a child to take care of.
Right.
And of course, at $7 an hour, it's very hard to make rent, let alone take care of another person in your life.
Sure.
Right.
And so what the union did is they decided to create a website of the strikers who'd been let go, and they encouraged people to sponsor these workers who had been let go and had no other means of survival while they were waiting for their outcome as to find out what was going to happen because it's illegal to strike. They filed suit, but to resolve that can take a number of years.
Sure.
And so it's really about supporting all workers, making sure they have the rights to a living wage, and making sure that nobody is oppressed and everybody basically has a path forward. Through unionization, the way that a living wage would be established would be through a democratic process, would
That's
be
right.
through a collective bargaining agreement. And that is the strength here. That would be the strength of the union. And that would be the hope. If you look at other countries where Walmart workers are unionized, like say in Germany, they have much better working conditions.
Right.
And yet Walmart is still open. They haven't closed their stores in Germany just because the workers were unionized. And so it has nothing to do with the health of the company. It has everything to do with the health and the quality of life of the workers.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up about Walmart shutting down this is the idea that if we increase the wages, it's going to shut down Walmart. And I'm trying to do the math here, because I know there's a surplus of wealth. And so I had talked to Milton about a transparency, not only for the government, but for these corporations, because at the end of the day, if you leave it up to the CEOs, they'll tell you, we don't have the money. And we could either have the choice to believe them or not to believe them. And so what are some of the structures, I guess, and you and Milton can jump in as far as because I'm thinking transparency.
Well, if you're talking about the richest corporations in the world, it's not a question about affordability.
Right.
Right, of course.
That is, what it really comes down to, here's the justification that they'll say. Well, it has to do with the people who own the stocks, the shareholders.
Right.
So there used to be a time, 40 years ago, where a corporation might say, okay, we want to get some profit for the shareholders, but we want to treat our workers fairly. Up until the 1970s, workers got a fair break. And with the whole issue of inequality that we've been hearing so much about, that Occupy Wall Street brought up, and the fact that you used the 99% versus the 1%, that's all about the Occupy Wall Street. Well, in the 1970s, workers increased productivity, and that showed in their wage increases and their benefits.
Right.
But beginning in the 70s, the corporation said, you know what, we can do a lot better. This was a counterattack on workers' rights. I come from Detroit, and the UAW was very strong there. There's a whole history there about the sit-downs and all of that. Well, corporations said, you know what, it's time for us to take back our power. And one way we can do that is we ship these jobs overseas.
Exactly.
So when we talk about deindustrialization, all of these plants closed down, they went to Mexico, then they went down, then they went other places, India, whatever. And it was all for the bottom line. At that point, things shifted. There was no interest in having workers getting a decent pay.
Right.
Even somebody like Henry Ford, who fought unions pretty intensely, even he said, if you pay the workers a living wage, it's good. $5 a day means that they'll buy the automobiles.
Exactly.
Right.
And here you don't think about corporations saying, well, guess what? If we pay a decent wage, it's going to be good for the economy.
Right.
That's been lost. So inequality since the 70s and this period of time has grown so immeasurably that now you have 1% owning 40% of the wealth in this country.
Wow.
1%.
Gideon, now you
Yes.
brought up before, I remember you explained the barter system. But my question is, like, let's just say that you have watermelons and I have gapples.
Exactly.
So what happens when there's a need outside of that? I mean, how would that work? As far as like, because Walmart has everything.
You're right.
So I mean, if you were to have watermelons, I mean, Walmart has 3 for $5, and so.
Well, let me ask this question, because when
Okay, go
as
ahead,
I
yeah.
listen to the
Yeah.
socialist agenda, what I'm hearing is capitalism at its worst and best. I want for our children that are watching to be able to determine what is the difference between capitalists, because we're still dealing with the European philosophy of economics and social control, social engineering. Each philosophy, whether it's capitalism or socialism. But what is the difference between the capitalist agenda, which we're living under now, where the worker becomes just a cog in a wheel, and as Black said, the 1% get most of the wealth, and the socialist agenda? Because you mentioned that socialism was being demonized. What are the tenets of socialism in capitalist jargon that makes it a bad deal, or something that shouldn't be dealt with for the masses? Because being social is a good thing. Why is it bad?
We have this bumper sticker that really says it in 3 words: people over profits. As soon as you frame it that way, that tells a whole lot, because under capitalism, it's profits over people.
Exactly.
People are expendable.
Exactly.
And so once you put people first, then everything flows from that. Because then you're talking about there should be a right for housing, there should be a right for jobs,
Medicine.
there should be a right for health care and medicine, there should be a right for
Education.
education. You go down the whole list, an economic bill of rights. It's funny, FDR had the list of economic bill of rights, and during that period of time, there was a depression and a crisis. And it's interesting, when there's a crisis often, then people start thinking long and hard about what is our system like now.
That's right.
What we're finding out, I don't mean to go off on this, but young people now, between 20 and 30, they've done some polling, and they have a more favorable view of socialism over capitalism. So what's interesting is they understand that there's something basically wrong here. When you go to school, student debt, you come out owing $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, and you're going to have to find a job, and you're not going to find it, even a fast food job. Even that's what, if you do find a job like that, what has your education got?
Well,
for
let
you?
me ask the young socialist
Yeah.
in America. I mean, because the issue is you're still dealing with human beings. Capitalism comes from the mind of a human. These same people understand that their people, the vast majority of the people, need to work. So as a young socialist looking at capitalism under a microscope, why is it then that these same people can create an evil system that dehumanizes the masses, whereas socialism says that we should? Where does the power come from this small elite group?
Well, basically it's because we have let them, we have let them take the power in many ways, but basically that is the way that it's set up. There are some people that say that the objective of capitalism is for one person to be left standing with all of the money.
Right.
In the arena, right?
Right.
That's
So-
competition.
The focus is increasingly, each and every day, it's on the individual, it's on competition, it's to amassing as much wealth as you possibly can, believing that if you amass a great amount of wealth, that there will necessarily be wealth for everybody else in the world, and it doesn't work that way.
Right, trickle down effect.
Right.
Trickle down
Right, that's what
economics.
Right.
The accumulation of wealth is basically, what you can, the way that you can look at that is you can look at that as basically somebody else's productivity making you rich. And more or less, the way that it's set up is that many workers themselves, as they produce, the profits are not flowing back to them.
Right.
The gains are not flowing back to them. They're flowing back to somebody else. And that's one of the reasons why collective bargaining agreements through unions are such a positive thing, is because if you're able to ensure that you claim a significant amount of those resources for the workers themselves, then you'll have more equitable distribution and ultimately healthier individuals with a better quality of life.
Well, let me ask this question, and Black, you can stop me.
Oh, go ahead.
What will stop a socialist oligarchy or ruling class under socialist government from taking the same type of control that you have in capitalism, where you have an oligarchy,
Right.
a social elite, a boule or whatever, that comes from the various groups, Shriners, Masons? What would stop them from taking control as we see under capitalism?
So what you want is like a check and balance, right, Gideon?
I'm asking the question.
Right. That's a good question. Yeah.
Well, I think once you say democratic socialism, you're linking the two together. You can't have socialism without democracy. Now, too often, and that's true in some of the communist countries, and going back 50, 60 years ago, the problem that they faced was, even though there were some very positive things that they were able to do for the people, it was a dictatorship in essence.
That's right.
And so if you have a democratic process, that's where the checks and balances come. And that's why when we talk about socialism, we always say democratic socialism. You can't have, there's a favorite saying that I've heard, democracy and oligarchy don't mix.
Right.
You've heard that. So once you put democracy up front, you're basically saying that there's going to be accountability, there's going to be transparency.
Right.
And so it depends on what kind of things you put in place to ensure that that happens. And
Now,
we're
Milton,
convinced we can do it.
Now, Milton,
Right.
Yeah.
Tracy, she's not here to defend herself, but she stated on the show, and I'm gonna bring her back on so we can all sit down and have this discussion fairly. But she said that she basically demonized democracy. She said it's not working. But Gideon and I, we can say that America's not practicing true democracy.
It's not.
You know,
Okay.
so how do we convince people? Because people make democracy and capitalism synonymous to each other.
Ah, good point.
So how do we, Milton, would you like to?
You want to give a shot at that?
Well,
like
part of
to-
the problem is that it's not just about the freedom to do whatever you want with your money. You know, the main issue I think that people have with socialism and thinking that it means less democracy as they think about the old state communist countries where you had one central authority
Right.
that was controlling all of the resources, and you had an elite that was controlling all of the money. And
Right.
one of the main focuses that you would probably see as part of increasing amount of socialism in this country is a reliance on decentralization. So if you didn't have one group of people making all the decisions about the resources, and if you had active citizen involvement in deciding what would happen to resources and deciding that at the local, the state, the federal level,
That's right.
you know, deciding those laws for themselves and ensuring that they got to vote. We have so many laws in this country. We have so many ways of suppressing votes in this country.
Absolutely.
And
Exactly.
that is one of the things that keeps capitalism in force, the interests of the rich in force, is that many people don't even get the vote or get the chance to vote.
Exactly.
Well, we have, by the way, a very sharp criticism of democracy here,
Absolutely.
political
Oh,
democracy.
absolutely.
And I think, and we probably would share that view with a lot of left groups and even a lot of mainstream folks. And so the question of Citizens United, for example,
Yes.
if you got the money, look who's controlling the airwaves and look who's going to be controlling who runs for
internet.
office and all that, the Tea Party, the corporate folks who are behind all of that.
Exactly.
So when you got a system that's so flushed with money, you can't have a democratic process. And I think that's what alienates a whole lot of folks, because they're seeing a system where money is what's controlling things. The more money, the more power. And we're not able to limit that kind of...
That's exactly right. In fact, one of the things that that socialists really do stand for is campaign finance reform and ensuring that we have controls in place that do not allow moneyed interests to get involved as heavily as they currently are in politics. That's one of the things that is controlling politics.
That's right.
In general, they're financing campaigns, they're influencing politicians.
Absolutely.
And it's just, that's something that you have to stop.
And they're changing laws to where a corporation is now a person,
That's right.
and has unlimited ability to finance. Now, you talked two things. You talked about decentralization. It's interesting to say decentralization when in a socialist agenda that's really you're trying to centralize for the disbursement of the masses. So it's almost like ideally the families would become a decentralized government within themselves, but part of a greater system, which is what we would say. You say, well, we decentralize so that a ruling class doesn't have the ability to control the resources and the power. However, once you decentralize, you create vassal kings, and according to what resources the people have in their land.
Okay, but Gideon, I'm gonna challenge you.
Yes, sir.
Because you went to Nigeria yourself.
Absolutely.
And you saw the tribesmen.
Absolutely.
And you yourself, and I want to get that tape from you again.
Yes, sir.
Because you tried to identify the leadership,
Right.
and they weren't centralized.
True. Well, they had leadership, like what he said, because I had to go to a 7-region area. I had to go to kings in each of those areas before I could even enter into the area.
No, but then they have, but what I'm saying, but the structure, they had a council though, right?
They had councils.
It was no centralized leadership.
There was a central government, but there was vassal kings that were set up over regions that kind of controlled, and I see it sounds similar to what he's saying.
Right.
So when we talk about a socialist government versus a capitalist government, how would the socialist government look different from what we have today?
And to add to that, how do we convince the people that socialism and because the biggest fear that they're going to, I always hear from Alex Joneses and the Tea Parties is that socialism leads to communism.
It's like marijuana leads to other
drugs,
socialism leads to
right.
to be commie word.
Right. Well, you were hitting on something.
Yes.
You need a balance. I'll give you an example of a balance. Something like healthcare. You need to have a single payer system, and that's got to be centralized.
Right.
And I'm fortunate because I get Medicare.
Yes, sir.
And as far as I'm concerned, I would want everybody in this country to have Medicare.
Why not?
Right, why not?
Why not? And it's administered by the government. Now that's some centralization.
That's centralization.
But there's a reason for that. There's certain kinds of services that need to be centralized.
Agreed.
And there might even be issues around utilities. What about transportation?
Certainly.
So the mix is some of these activities and some of these services need to be centralized, but there are other parts that could be decentralized. For example, one of the things that we found very interesting is the whole cooperative movement.
Right.
Right, yes.
Workers forming
That's right. Oh, no, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying that's fascinating. Not too many people really are aware that there are cooperatives and that they're growing.
Absolutely.
That's right.
And people don't think in terms of they belong to a credit union.
Yes.
That's a cooperative venture.
Absolutely.
And if we build more of those institutions here, that's where the decentralization is. You can have these banks, cooperative banks, who could be investing in the community.
That's right.
And it would be the folks in that community who would have some authority and control and responsibility for what goes on. So the question then is, how do you balance the different factors? But for us, as democratic socialists, we think you can work that all out. You can do both. And that the richer it is, the more alternatives that there are available, the better. But clearly there are some things that government needs to take care of, and then there are some things that could be done locally in a lot of different ways.
You know, Black, I want to ask this other question because the main thing that you guys have hinged on is finances. And dealing in America, I want to ask the question from a democratic socialist, what do you call true finance? Because we're dealing with a fiat economy in America, where the money is printed. It's made out of cotton and linen. Its value is the same as what we wear on our backs and go to the bathroom with. It's worthless. It's backed by atomic bombs, military actions, jail time, and bill collectors. So when we really talk about real finance and understanding that America was broke in 1933, money no longer backed by a gold standard, what is the socialist agenda when it comes to true finance versus a fiat economy where America is basing itself on its military might and taking other nations' real estate and their resources?
Let me try one shot at it, and then you can pick up on that. To me, is you got to start with regulation. One of the things that we found out, we're very active, a number of our folks, in the Occupy Our Homes. You got home, I think everybody here knows somebody who's been foreclosed. Right?
Hello.
And who's responsible for that?
The banks.
The bankers.
The big banks.
Exactly.
And the kind of securitization process, what they wound up doing is they bundled all the stuff together. They didn't care about anything except that they can get a piece of the action, pass it along the line, and they get a piece of it and get. Pretty soon, you know, if you were the owner, you didn't even know who held your mortgage.
Exactly.
Right. Oh,
exactly.
Right.
Why? Because it was he knows about it, right?
Believe me, I know.
And then you wanted to find out who you're going to try to modify, who's going to deal with it.
Right. Robo signing. Once you caught them in the act, then they like, yeah. Go ahead.
So you know that this was a total ripoff.
Total.
And so
sponsored by the government, by the way, Fannie Mae.
Freddie Mac. Right.
Right, all of the banks were in on that deal. And what wound up happening is they got bailed out. We would chant at any of these demonstrations and these homes, bankers got bailed out, homeowners got sold out.
That's it.
Well, Mel, it sounds like you need a total revolutionary change here, because these banks are still dealing with the corporations overseas, because, you know, Gideon mentioned the fiat, but then we have the resources that we take you got the cobalt, the coltan that we make the cell phones. You know, we got all these things with military might, I might ask.
That's a very good point, and actually, that was one of the things fine to mention was that, you know, you're asking about finance and how that controls our lives. Well, you look at the military, you think about the number of wars that we've been in the past 10, 20 years. Some of the big influencers, of course, of those wars are the arms manufacturers.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
If you can think of a reason, you know, if you can warrant something in the name of national security, then perhaps you can get the government to buy more weapons and more arms from you, more airplanes. We've got, you know, when you think about companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, General Dynamics, all those, they make a lot of money off of our government, and they are some of the wealthiest companies in the country. And it's from having that political influence. And you know, that's one of the things that's scary. It's this entire, it's this atmosphere where profit and capital are what influence the government. It's not the people.
Right.
And that's what we've got to change.
So that's not democracy, is it?
Right. Yeah, I want to
that's not democracy.
Right. I want to piggyback on that, because part of this is United States acting as an empire.
That's right.
And this is a piece that people don't, if you watch any of the news outlets, all this discussion about Iran, right? What should we do? And people, we got some of the Republicans talking about taking them out and doing all this kind of thing. None of them mention that we overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran in 1954. And then they wonder, why did the Iranians not like the United States? What is it that, why can't they understand that we're peaceful people?
We're good guys.
And that's been our whole history.
Right.
It's in, where you look at Guatemala, you can, Dominican Republic.
Teach.
That's right.
And so for us not to understand the connection between, and there's the link, what you guys were just talking about with Guatemala was a United Fruit Company. So here you had corporations linked in with the US government in terms of foreign policy saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. Why was Mossadegh overthrown? Because of oil. He wanted to nationalize
right.
oil. Hey, that's not good for some of our corporations, right?
Right.
So when we talk about dealing with issues, we got to understand the link between foreign policy, corporations, and their involvement in setting government policy.
In Venezuela, anyone?
Right.
Venezuela.
Right. So I mean, what is the threat of? Because I notice the countries that we attack just happen to be socialist countries like Syria, Libya.
I don't know if I would call them socialist countries. No.
Give us a socialist country then.
Oh, yeah, give us one. I'm
There's actually
France. Okay, somebody said France. All right.
You doing listening
That
to
was
this?
George.
He's on top.
All right.
Well, here's what we would say. We would say that there aren't any socialist countries in terms of our model. What we do have is social democratic countries. I'll give you an example of those social democratic countries. You were mentioning France, Sweden, Norway, Denmark. Now, what makes them social democratic countries? Because they have capitalism, but there are lots of protections for working people. They get, for example, this is unheard of for us. France, by the way, you can talk about childcare. There's no childcare problem in France.
Right.
Right. All that is public. You don't have to spend 3/4 of your income on daycare.
Wow.
Right.
That's a
Wow.
blasphemy in this country that we have working mothers that go out.
Exactly.
They work for the wage that they get, and they have to give most of that to daycare.
Exactly.
Right. Well, Gideon, I know we would argue that the whole capitalist system, I mean, they've been doing that since slavery.
Exactly.
You know, working the kids and the mothers in the cotton fields. So
Yes.
they have a model which to follow from.
We're poster children for it.
I mean, but go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
Well, by the
interrupt,
way,
but
in
just make
some
that-
of these social democratic countries, we just picked child care, but they get paid vacation under the law.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
A month's vacation in a number of these countries.
Exactly.
Paid vacation. The employer doesn't have a choice about
Right.
whether they give vacations.
Right,
If
right.
you're a fast food worker here, you work for Walmart, what kind of vacation benefits are you going to get? And for fast food workers, they're not going to get vacation benefits, period. What
Right.
about sick leave if you're sick?
Right. Yes.
You don't have the right to sick leave, whereas in a lot of countries that's guaranteed. And you were
That's all.
asking about decentralization of power, and part of that is giving people certain economic rights.
Right.
in
Which are
their
human
lives.
rights.
Right, these are human rights that are given to them, so they themselves have greater power maybe to determine who they work for and when and why.
Right.
Things of that nature, really, that empowers the individual a lot more, and that takes a lot of the authority, a lot of the power that, say, industry has over your life and what
Right.
decisions you make for yourself. You know?
That's a perfect example. This is something else. United States is so unusual, so unique, and in such a
In
negative
a bad way.
Whoa, how bad is this? We're the only country, industrialized country, that has what you call employment at will.
Right.
You know what
Oh,
employment
yeah.
at will is? You walk in, you're working, it doesn't matter if you worked a year or 2 years, and the employer decides,
They don't like your hair.
Yeah.
right, you're gone. You didn't say hello properly, I didn't get a good enough smile from you, you're
Right.
out of here. What did you do? Didn't do anything in particular, but the right of the employer to
Summarily.
dismiss you without cause. Reason, no reason, bad reason, it doesn't matter.
No due process.
No due process at all. In these other countries, they actually, if there's no union where there's an appeal procedure, they have industrial courts.
Yes.
You can take your case to
Wow.
industrial court,
Wow.
and they will determine whether
You need to hit the
you're-
gavel on that one, man.
You know what?
Yeah,
Let's talk about Iceland.
I mean,
Let's talk about Iceland, how they
Yes.
locked up the bankers. Let's talk about that since we're on the subject.
And let's talk about
yeah.
India. Well, go ahead, talk about it.
Yeah. Let's talk about Iceland, how? Because I mean, you bring up it just made me hit the gavel. Because I mean,
Yeah,
hear
well-
how you got these people coming together and locked up the banksters.
Well,
But
one
they
of
didn't want
our-
that news to get out here, of course.
Right.
One of our heroes is Bernie Sanders. He's a senator from Vermont. He's the only avowed Democratic socialist. He's a senator. And what he winds up pointing out, and he came to Atlanta a couple of times, we got involved in his campaign, and he speaks about all the issues that we're talking about. And he keeps pointing out, how come none of these banksters were imprisoned?
Right.
None of them.
Right.
Right.
And so that's the question you're
Right.
asking. But in
Exactly.
Iceland, they found, hey, there's culpability here.
Right.
You're going to get your due here.
Right.
And
Right.
here,
Because they're working for the oligarchy.
But
all
let me-
right,
let me give-
but I would put this little but to
Okay.
it. It does make a difference if you have somebody standing up, willing to take a chance and try to challenge the bankers on this.
Okay.
And Elizabeth Warren is a good example. That's why when we don't write off electoral politics, there are some left groups who say getting involved in electoral politics is a waste of time. There is no difference at all who is in office.
Right.
There are some left groups who believe that. We think that it does make a difference. Now, it also is a fact, and we won't dispute this, that there's a lot of corporate influence in the Democratic Party, and there's a lot of politicians in the Democratic Party who are Republicans, basically, who have
It's
no
an
idea.
incestuous relationship, sir.
Absolutely,
But let me say
absolutely.
this.
But what I'm
Okay, go
saying
ahead.
is, on that issue, is there have been some rules now that put a little teeth into some regulation. There's a possibility that things will be a little bit better now. The banks can't speculate quite the way they did before.
They just changed the rules, sir.
Now the question is how much are they going to keep bending and changing the rules?
Exactly.
But if we don't take them on and say we're going to fight to make sure that those rules are going to be put into effect, they're going to have free reign. So we better be able to challenge them at that level. Otherwise, it's going to be a repeat of what we just went through.
Okay, and this is where I was trying to ask Tracy, and I'm going to ask you, Milton, because Ron Paul made the same argument, and he talked about how those banksters should have got arrested, and he's saying that the Democratic Party, the Libertarians are saying that the Republicans got hijacked. They're not us. They've been co-opted, so they're making some of the same arguments. Now y'all can,
No.
Well,
let
it's
me know.
infighting. What you're really talking about, I mean,
Well, they're
this is-
saying co-opted, Gideon. They're saying that that's not us.
Well, that's what
saying-
they say, but here
Okay.
it's like the South and the North fighting against each other. Even when I'm dealing with socialism and capitalism, they are brothers of a origin and their history and so forth. But you're really talking philosophy. So you're talking about the South and the North fighting against each other. But the
wait.
question is, what is the true source and what is the ultimate? When we talk about capitalism, or you said capitalism it's a one man left standing scenario.
Right.
What is the ultimate end of socialism? What is at the end of the rainbow when a socialist government? What do you see? The kingdom of Yah?
Human needs being met.
Correct. I believe it was Marx that said, from each according to his ability and to each according to his need, meaning that the citizens of our society should be able to contribute to their ability at the level that they would like and at the level that they are able, and still receive from society satisfaction of their needs. And we talk about a number of needs, the main ones being housing, healthcare, transportation, education.
Okay, can I stop you on
These are
education?
rights.
Because education is the core of, like you said, working to one's ability. So how do we determine people making nuclear medicine from those forming the ores? I mean, how do we determine the different types of jobs? Because there's going to be this great need, like I want to be an engineer, or I want to be in the Senate, or, how do we, is there still,
Because the ruling class, the oligarchy normally controls what is education, other than you being a farmer or...
So now we got to get back to the checks and balances of
Basically,
education.
what we're
Okay.
saying is that it should not matter if you work at McDonald's, if you work at Walmart. That's not a reason to keep somebody in poverty.
Right.
Right,
Right.
agreed.
But getting back to the education, that's the question you're asking. And then
Yeah, because that's the core.
That's
Right.
core.
Right.
But the answer to that question is looking at through a class perspective. What I mean by that is
key.
Who gets decent education in this country?
Oh, right.
And whose
Who
history?
doesn't get decent education?
But let me ask this: and whose history is it that will be taught in the education? See, we have a
Well,
international world of knowledge, but we're only being fed an European-styled education.
Okay.
But I'm getting back to the class nature of that. I think that's a good point too. If you got people living in suburbia,
Right.
Right.
you're not going to hear them complain when
Right.
in wealthy districts about
Right.
education.
Exactly.
Right.
They are very happy with it.
Exactly.
In fact, they'll say it's working fine.
Exactly.
That's right.
Where is the finger always pointed to?
To poor.
To the poor folks here. How come these school districts aren't doing well? Do they get the same amount of money per capita that the students in the suburbs get?
do not.
They do not get.
Right.
Do they have a leg up, like in suburbia? A lot of families who can
and
provide
12.
additional services and all that kind of thing?
They do not.
They don't have that. And so the notion of what winds up being is developing these charter schools,
Right.
trying to undermine a public school system. You got corporations coming in and say, we can do better. And what are they going to teach? Getting back to your question,
Right.
what is going to be their interest in teaching?
Exactly.
Well, we want to teach you so you can be the cog in our corporation to do our
Exactly.
bidding. So you'll be
Exactly.
an obedient and a good worker. That's what their intent is.
Exactly.
And so we got to understand that class perspective. If we understand that, then we got to realize that the only way we can solve that problem is to make a major change, not in the
Absolutely.
community, giving everybody the same opportunities, and to support the public school system and not let it be undermined the way it is right now.
Well, when we talk about tribalism and so in a socialist regime, obviously education is what the topic that we're dealing with at this point. And your education from a Celtic, Goth, European perspective is one. Mine from a Hebraic, coming out of another region of the world is another. How in a socialist regime would we equalize the education to where it would be decentralized from a cultural perspective, but centralized to give all of the children the wealth of their history and their ancestry versus what we've got today?
Actually, one of the things that they have in other countries that I think is very beneficial to their people is that they have national curricula. It's the national government that defines the curriculum. Now, that is a centralized concept. However, you could have a mechanism by which the regions, the states, for example, could have input into the curriculum, but you would have, like, say, certain standards that would need to be met that would be defined by the federal government, and you would ensure that regions across the country were equally funded in terms of their education. That's a big problem that we have. Like, say my mother used to be a school teacher in Oklahoma. It's one of the poorest states in the country. They do not receive more money from the federal government to pay their teachers the same as they get in New York,
Right.
just because their
Right.
state doesn't have that much money. It's really the state. It's the state legislators who make those decisions, and that's incredibly unfair to the people there because they have larger class sizes.
Exactly.
Their teachers may not be as motivated because they don't make the same wages, not nearly as much as they do elsewhere. So that's just something to think about.
Well, I think what happened in Michigan, my experience there, I was in labor studies, and what the school there, Wayne State University, they wound up with an African American studies program.
Okay.
They wound up with a labor studies program, a women's studies program, a minority studies program. Now, if you're talking about education, you need to cover those kinds of areas. And if there's a particular interest and people want to concentrate in that field, there should be the opportunity to do that. So I think that could be built in because we need to respect the rights of the minorities and the rich heritage that they bring. That's what makes for an exciting culture, is variety and diversity.
Exactly.
And that's what socialism promotes and encourages.
Well, let me ask you a quick. This is for Milton and Trevor. Let me ask a quick because I see I'm in the mind state of the fat cat. So let me ask you the question. Y'all both can answer. Are there enough resources to go around?
I think that is a huge misnomer that there's not enough resources to go around.
Right. Because I keep hearing this, and I'm imagining
depopulation, baby. That's depopulation terminology to
Okay,
make sure so that you'll be
explain.
okay with when they wipe out a whole section of folk. You know?
Well, go ahead, Trevor. Explain.
On a per capita basis, our economy is one of the richest in the world. It still is.
Right.
You know, that may change soon. We don't know how things are going to be years from now. But
Now, why would it change?
well, that just has to do with the decisions that we are currently making as a country, and in particular in terms of our education and our investment in research and development, which, by the way, is a very socialist concept. When you think about it, if your government is investing in research and development itself,
Yes.
then the people are also going to benefit from that. And that includes, like, say, the development that we're doing for new antibiotics. That can help society, most definitely. But to answer your question, it's not about having enough money. It's how do we use the resources that we have as a collective, and how do we ensure that we distribute those resources so that they're used in the best optimal way possible, so that they are the most beneficial.
I have a little story, cute little story that I heard, a metaphor maybe. You have a corporate CEO is sitting at a table. You've got somebody from the Tea Party sitting at the table.
Yes.
And somebody from the labor movement sitting at the table. There's 10 cookies on the table. The CEO takes 9 of the cookies and says to the Tea Party, "Watch out that he doesn't take your cookies." Now,
I love it.
I love that.
now, where did all of those 9 cookies go, and who basically made the decision that it's their right to have it all?
Right.
And I think what Travis is basically saying is there is enough wealth, but the game is to shape it in such a way, and you see that with the whole notion of everything that we're dealing with, the whole deficit situation. All of that is a game.
It is.
It's
Right.
framing it a certain way. Hold it. If we get people back to work, then look at the deficit's going to keep going up. But it doesn't deal with the immediate situation, which is people are out of work. We're still in a severe recession,
Exactly.
long-term unemployment.
Yes, sir.
And that should be the target. And a number of economists have basically said if we had a jobs program, if we got people back to work, that would be the best thing for the economy.
Right.
Not this worrying about the debt down the road, because once you get people back to work, all of those issues get to be resolved.
Well, now, what about the conspiracy in socialism? Because obviously, getting people back to work makes sense. But it seems like socialists have been co-opted. If they have not been, how do you see socialists rising above the capitalist beast and being able to slay the beast? Or are you hoping, as a Hebrew, I look for a divine power to overcome the beast? But as a socialist, how do you see the beast being overcome? Because these corporations have now been given the military by law.
That's right.
Now to establish their own militaries. So they are arming themselves for what they ultimately see as food wars, riots. How do you see socialism rising above that?
Well, I'll give you one example. Cornel West.
Yes. Tavis Smiley.
Cornel West is an honorary chair of our organization, Democratic Socialists of America.
Okay.
Now, have you heard him criticize the administration in very sharp terms?
Absolutely.
What has he basically said? What are we doing with drones?
Right.
Right.
Killing civilians. What are we...
American, by the way.
That is right.
That's right.
And we heard him when he was in town with Tavis Smiley on his book. And he's saying, what about poverty? Why isn't that on the national agenda? Standing up pretty tough and hard, saying poverty's got to be a key issue on all of this.
That's true.
And he said, what is this administration done being in bed with the same banksters that Bush had?
Right.
So yeah, you can be a democratic socialist and you can speak out and be critical and be pretty sharp. And by the way, Cornel West has been criticized by some folks for being too hard on Obama.
Because he's part of the oligarchy.
in some sense, you're right. He's being
Exactly.
influenced. He's being influenced
Yes.
by the same forces
Absolutely.
that run the government
Certainly.
in a lot of different ways.
But the reason why he's being influenced is because we have a structure that allows that.
Hello.
Right.
That's the entire problem. It doesn't matter how good of a person you are when
Right.
you become a politician.
Yes.
You're not likely to stay that way, and that's the.
Well, that's why I
the problem.
respect President Obama. I love him, and to the extent that he's a soldier and a prince. But he said at the head in his chief seat, he said, "You cannot change this government from the inside." Well, if you can't change it from the inside, the only way you're going to be able to change it is through revolution.
Well, here's where we go on that.
Okay.
Here's our take on it. You need to be on the streets. If that's what you mean by revolution.
That's revolution to
being
me.
on the streets, and that's why we support the strikes that these fast food workers, the Walmart workers, whatever you have to do, occupy our homes.
That's right.
When they civil disobedience, when they sit in, and we've had some of our folks who've been arrested as a
Yes.
result of that.
That's right.
All of that puts pressure on the forces that make those decisions. So you've got to be on the streets, but you also got to have an inside game.
You got
so
to.
from our perspective, and this again, which differentiates us from some other groups, you need them both. You can't have one
Right, I
without
agree.
the other. Now, the being on the streets, there's the old story, you heard this with FDR. You want me to act right? Make me do it. What does make me do it mean? You're out on the streets and you're creating the issue. Occupy Wall Street made that happen to a great extent because it put the attention on the banks where it needed to belong. And all of a sudden now, even the most conservative forces in this country acknowledge that there's inequality.
Oh my God!
We've been
No,
talking
they
about
didn't.
that.
What?
Oh, this might be a problem,
Like
they
it's
say.
a surprise.
It's a surprise.
What do you see as the ultimate end of America?
Well, y'all can, because I think I like the, like I said, I like the strategy of Iceland. You know, I like what they've, you know, that was really. I mean, we had our our Occupy Wall Street, but they actually locked up their Wall Street. Basically, they, incarcerated them. So I want to. I mean, that right there, I think that will definitely send shockwaves up into Congress and the Senate, and because I mean, it's like, okay, we'll just calm them down for a short time, and we'll just give them some more crumbs, and and it seems like it kind of diffuses the movement. I mean, like the Occupy Wall Street. I mean, I don't know. It's just my opinion. It seemed like it diffused, but I mean, if I'm wrong, please.
Well,
correct.
I think probably what you have to watch is the fact that in this country, because we are a very big country,
Sure.
we are made up not just of one community, but of many, many different kinds of communities,
Certainly.
different walks of life and cultures and whatnot.
Sure.
People tend to solidify their base around specific issues.
That's true.
Very good.
Right.
Whether it be housing or workers' rights or women's rights or gay rights or whatnot.
Right.
When you look at each of these movements, it's, basically that's where this is going. So if there's one movement, like say Occupy Wall Street, maybe that didn't continue. They couldn't stay in Bucati Park forever and ever.
Right.
But that movement inspired others. It gave birth, to other groups around the country that want to continue in that spirit. That spirit is still alive.
Right.
And so as we get more groups such as that, that coalesce around these issues, that I think that's what's going to keep this going.
Travis really hit it right there, because if we can build a multiracial, a movement that represents the interests of women, minorities, gays, the whole range of groups that have not been treated fairly, a broad-based movement that can coalesce, and that's why one of the things that DSA feels very strongly about is working in coalitions.
Right. I agree.
You deal with a lot of issues. We got our folks who are activists, they're involved in a whole range of areas,
That's right.
but they all understand the importance of coming together and
That's
building
right.
a broad mass movement, and that's what you got to do. So to say what is it going to look like, the only way I would look at the future is, can we build this kind of broad-based mass movement? What's it going to take? And the way we do that is, nobody's got the right answer.
No, I disagree.
But that, what I mean by the right answer, meaning nobody can say, follow us.
Mm.
We all got to be doing this together, and through that work together, certain things will happen and say, yes, this is the direction that we need to go.
But aren't we looking at this right now from a capitalist agenda in a secular humanist perspective? Because that's what I think I hear you talking, secular humanism, where we're on an equal basis, but see, all things aren't equal. I mean, there are some that are born with and some that are born without. So from the jump, things aren't equal.
Well, Gideon, I think they both made a very good point as far as like, because we all have like different groups. You know, you have PETA over here,
Sure.
this organization over here, and
Exactly.
you know, what might be your interest may not interest me. That's why I said,
Right.
I know one thing, that these gentlemen like to drink clean water
Hello.
and they want a decent wage.
Clean air.
So that's not,
Right.
so we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on that. So I
Right.
think these organizations will agree upon a livable wage. I think we can all agree on that, you know what I'm saying? And then I think we can just take it in steps, but let's
Right.
work on the most important thing, that we all want wage equality.
Right. You could argue that almost all these movements are socialist in some way or another.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
You know, and that's the overriding idea.
Mhm.
The problem with Americans is that we tend not to think as often in terms of ideology. We don't like to talk about ideology in
Right,
the
right,
abstract.
right.
We like to ask for concrete things.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
And so you'll see a lot of the same types of themes and elements that will recur in different movements. You know,
Sure.
For example, you think about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act that's been sitting around in the Senate forever.
Right.
That would make it illegal to discriminate against gays and lesbians
Sure.
in the workplace. And that's something that's desperately needed. There's still people being fired right and left for coming out in the workplace.
Sure.
And that's something that women can identify with, that
That's true.
African Americans should be able to identify with. And so we'll see each other in our different movements, but it may not necessarily be our own personal movement.
There's a model that we have, and this is a good thing to keep in mind. Moral Mondays. You all know about the Moral Mondays in North Carolina, where Reverend Barber and the NAACP, they wound up targeting the legislature on a whole range of issues. We're going to have an action here on the Medicaid. Why isn't our government, why isn't the state providing Medicaid to poor people? So there's going to be an action on Moral Monday, and that'll be a chance for a lot of groups to come together.
Okay, we're gonna have some more groups come on, and like Malcolm X said, it's freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody. Court is adjourned.
Power to the people. Here come the judge.